inevitably end in tears when governments intervene in business and market?
I think it's a very fair point, because free market thinking and free market thought it should be encouraged, and you just need to look at the classic West or East Germany or North or South Korea combinations and comparisons to see the evidence of that. However, you've got to think about regulation's important. You've got to understand that a laissez-faire approach can lead sometimes to some excesses and some monopolistic issues and things like that. And correctly, a light touch regulation to stop self-interested investors or individuals or companies dominating and monopolising things is quite correct. So that's, I think, where governments can play a role. I think where it becomes way beyond that, where they're looking to establish a particular way of thinking or acting, or from perhaps even a government's self-interest perspective of how things work out, that's where you start getting problems. So I think, unfortunately, when you look back to things like the banking crisis of 2008-9, a lot of that was as a consequence of, if you like, laissez-faire approach kind of going to extremes in excess, and people should have stepped in a number of years earlier. And correctly, I think the government bailed out the banks in order then to say, right guys, you're going to reset yourselves onto a more sensible and level playing field. But yes, generally I would agree. Governments can't overreach, but they have an important regulatory perspective, but it needs to be a light touch. And it needs to be able to say, to break up monopolies, to focus on the real fundamentals, and ultimately to let businessmen get on with it, but not to abuse certain situations.
How did the Keynesian approach to the last decade come to be delivered? In effect, big government, big brother. And is it something that can, and in your opinion, should be reversed?
I think today's world, when you look at it, is one of ever more globalisation, ever more instant information awareness, and consequently a world where the ability for a national government to say this is how it should be and we're going to drive it this way is becoming less and less relevant. Because business is having to react, business, financial markets, whatever, it's having to react to more shorter term, immediate global issues. And governments are slow moving, they're necessarily bureaucracy led, they're limited by their understanding of events, and they can be superseded by them. To me, it's far more interesting to see the rise and rise and rise of not only the world of corporates versus that of governments, and I would argue, I could name 10 leading companies that I would argue are much more influential on the world today than most mid or even large-sized countries' governments. And then you think about it in the world of the individual as well. Whilst, for tax reasons, people are domiciled somewhere or have a particular focus somewhere as defined by law, the reality is, I think you're getting this greater sub-component of the populace who view themselves much more as global citizens. Certainly I would, in the sense that people you're interacting with, people you're talking to, information that you're appraising, whatever, is coming from very much a global perspective nowadays. And consequently, the notion that a national government, through intervention and through their own deliverance, can make a huge difference, I think is becoming laughable. I put much more faith in companies per se, but also much more faith in that globalised big picture outlook, which actually is allowing individuals, companies or governments to kind of go to the next stage. It's a different world, the 21st century, and I think you've got to take that into account.